Friends, if you're excited about the upcoming blockbuster Captain America, Brave New World, then you're going to love this video. If you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any updates. Today we're diving into everything you need to know about Captain America, Brave New World, what the movie is about, when and where you can watch it, and all the exciting details that make it one of the most talked about films of 2025. I'll also share which streaming service or TV network is expected to release it so you can be ready when it drops. We'll take a closer look at the film's creative side, from its direction, cinematography, and production design to its high-octane action sequences and stunning visual effects. I'll walk you through the music score, the filming process, post-production work, and even the projected budget and box office performance. On top of that, we'll break down the story concept, give a quick review of the plot, and discuss how this movie builds on the legacy of Captain America within the Marvel Universe. We'll also uncover interesting behind-the-scenes facts, the complete storyline, and how the cast brings these characters to life. You'll find out which familiar faces are returning, which new heroes or villains are making their debut, and how each role connects to the bigger picture. So, stick around until the very end of the video, there's a lot to reveal. Now, let's get started. The story doesn't tiptoe in. It kicks the door open with a high-stakes operation that looks like a simple rescue and instantly spirals into an international headache. The shield is introduced less like a prop and more like a promise, and the first minutes make it clear that promises are expensive. A quick win turns complicated, the media chorus gets loud, and the central question lands fast. What does that shield stand for right now, in front of a fractured world that can't agree on the definition of hero? Structurally, the film rides a clean three-act backbone but toys with perspective to keep you leaning forward. It cuts between boots-on-the-ground chaos and the crisp chill of backroom decision-making, sometimes letting a briefing or a news clip rewrite what you thought you saw in the field. Flashbacks drop in like puzzle pieces, not to dump lore, but to show how a choice made years ago quietly set today's crisis in motion. The effect isn't non-linear for flashiness, it's there to build pressure, to make every present-tense move feel haunted by yesterday. The early stretch builds momentum with a breadcrumb trail that refuses to stay tidy. What looks like random sabotage starts showing a signature. The first turning point hits when a trusted channel goes bad, forcing our hero to ditch the PR-friendly route and go off the grid. The mission stops being about optics and starts being about lives. Friendlies become question marks. A handoff in a crowded public space becomes a gauntlet run. The chase is kinetic, but the film keeps cutting back to how a single decision on camera can play like a victory in one country and a provocation in another. Now the heat rises. The antagonist doesn't announce themselves with a cartoon monologue, they demonstrate a thesis. A proof-of-concept attack lands right where it will hurt the most: public trust. The midpoint flips the board by turning the conversation from whether the hero can physically win to whether the hero deserves the authority to try. It's the heaviest punch of the movie, and it's mostly ideological. The shield used to end arguments. Here it starts them, and that friction fuels the entire second act. What follows is a stretch of smart, globe-trotting move, adapt, improvise. A tight urban chase that feels one breath away from disaster. A tense infiltration where the loudest sound is a heartbeat against steel. A quiet front porch scene where someone who paid for past heroism with real-life consequences asks the questions no headline ever will. The film keeps toggling between spectacle and soul, never letting one cancel out the other. Every location change isn't just a new skyline, it's a new angle on the same ethical knot. Then the floor gives way. The all is lost turn isn't just a capture or a failed mission, it's a moral trap. The villain reframes the conflict so cleanly you almost hate how reasonable it sounds. If safety requires surrendering choice, is it safety or control the hero has to pick between obeying a process that's too slow to save anyone or breaking it and risking becoming the very thing they're fighting? Teammates splinter, not because they don't care, but because they care in different directions. It's messy, human, and exactly where a Captain America story should get uncomfortable. The run-up to the finale is a study in solving problems that fists can't fix alone. The plan isn't about landing the biggest punch, it's about building the right coalition. A technician who was background noise in Act 1 suddenly matters. A rival with a grudge becomes a reluctant ally because the alternative is worse. The hero's superpower here isn't flight or lightning, it's conviction that persuades people who don't like each other to pull in the same direction for 10 crucial minutes. The climax is engineered like a pressure valve about to pop. On one track, a city-scale threat demands classic action. precision timing, impossible angles, and sheer will. On the other, a live broadcast forces a choice that can't be walked back. The cross-cutting makes it clear the real victory isn't shutting down a device, it's planting a standard the world can live with tomorrow. The hero makes the move only this version of Captain America would make, not just saving people, but publicly defining the terms under which power will be used going forward, even if it burns a bridge that would have made future fights easier. And when the dust settles, the movie refuses the neat bow. The win is real, the cost is visible, and the world looks different enough to earn the title. The shield feels heavier and more honest. The symbol no longer belongs to any single office or agency, it belongs to the people who have to live under it. Promises are still expensive, but now the receipt is itemized. The last scenes nudge threads outward, new alliances that feel uneasy, old debts that didn't vanish just because the day was saved, and a public that's paying closer attention than ever. The hero's arc starts with a question and ends with a stance. At first, the shield feels like inherited homework, a symbol everyone grades differently and no one agrees on how to use. He begins by trying to be worthy of it, almost apologizing with every decision, calibrating to what the world wants to see. As pressure mounts, that people-pleasing instinct breaks. He stops asking whether he's allowed to lead and starts defining what leadership looks like. The change isn't flashy, it's measured in choices where he picks transparency over convenience, people over optics, and responsibility over permission. By the time the story crests, he's using the shield less as a badge and more as a promise he's actively cashing, even when it costs him allies or easy wins. The antagonist is built like a thesis in motion. They don't enter twirling a mustache. They enter with a grievance that makes uncomfortable sense and a plan that turns fear into leverage. Their speeches are engineered to recruit the disillusioned, and their tactics hit trust instead of just targets. What makes them compelling is how closely their solution hugs the hero's problem. Both want safety, dignity, order, only the method divides them. Each confrontation forces the hero to articulate not just what he stands against but what he stands for. The villain grows from clever disruptor to movement architect, and the growth lands because it's powered by belief, not just explosions. A veteran figure lives in the story's quiet spaces, the kind of presence who measures heroism in scar tissue rather than headlines. Their scenes don't hand out pep talks, they pose questions the hero can't dodge. Are you carrying a symbol or is it carrying you? Do you want this because it's right, or because you're afraid of who will hold it if you don't? The mentor's arc bends from guarded skepticism to earned trust, and that trust is never sentimental. It arrives after the hero proves he'll take a hard stand without outsourcing the moral math. The partner in the field delivers the kinetic counterpoint. Hungry, fast, occasionally reckless, this character starts by trying to mirror the hero's moves and keeps tripping over the shadow. Failure teaches restraint, and restraint turns into timing. A mid-story misread nearly breaks the team, the late-story handoff, executed on a breath and a nod, rebuilds it. Their growth is the thesis of good teamwork, not louder, not flashier, just sharper. The moment they stop asking for permission and start anticipating purpose, the action sequences unlock a new precision. Across the aisle sits the institution, a power broker, a director, a chair with veto pens instead of superpowers. This character begins as friction in a suit, the human face of red tape. What deepens them is motive, they genuinely believe guardrails save lives. Their conflict with the hero is a chess match of timelines, policy speed versus crisis speed. Over time, the stalemate shifts into a begrudging pact. Not friendship, not even alignment, but mutual recognition that accountability and agility have to learn to share a room. Their arc shapes the film's stakes beyond any single fight. It's about who gets to decide what protection looks like on Monday morning. A civilian perspective keeps the story honest. Sometimes it's a paramedic who refuses to leave the hot zone, sometimes a journalist who keeps the camera steady, sometimes a neighbor who remembers what the last, necessary, operation cost the block. They don't fight with gadgets, they fight with memory. Their scenes sand the myth off the symbol and make the consequences tangible. A small callback late in the film, an echo of a line or a gesture from the civilian thread, lands harder than a building collapse and quietly recenters the hero's compass. The rival ally is crafted for conflict with a purpose. On paper they're on the same side. In practice they grade success differently. Where the hero weighs legitimacy, the rival worships results. Early banter crackles, mid-movie clashes bruise, and then the story finds the narrow path where both skill sets matter. The payoff isn't a hug, it's a perfectly timed play where the rival takes the hit the hero can't afford to take and does it without asking for applause. Respect replaces rivalry because the mission finally demands both philosophies. Even the tech mind in the chair gets an arc. They start as a torrent of jargon and gadgets, a walking upgrade path. Then a plan fails, and suddenly the human behind the interface steps forward. Fear, guilt, stubborn hope. They design less and decide more, shifting from clever to courageous. When a late beat hinges on a manual override no one wants to touch, it's this character's hand that doesn't shake, and that quiet bravery resonates longer than any drone swarm. Relationships cross-pollinate these arcs. The hero's leadership grows teeth because the partner matures. The mentor's faith matters because the institution's doubt doesn't disappear. The civilian's memory forces the antagonist to reveal where their philosophy turns into control. The rival's respect gives the finale its hinge. In every pairing, motivation is the engine. One character wants safety without compromise, another wants justice without delay, another wants truth without spin, another wants absolution without confession. The collisions between those wants write the movie's best scenes. Most importantly, the symbol itself behaves like a character in the room. At first it drags, then it steadies, and eventually it calibrates to the person carrying it. The hero learns when to raise it, when to put it down, and when to let it speak for him. That evolution turns action into argument and argument into action, and it's why the fights feel like debates with velocity instead of just choreography with sparks. Growth here isn't a speech. It's a series of choices that add up to a person who can look at power, call it what it is, and still choose to carry it the hard way. The lead steps into the role with a balance of weight and agility, carrying the shield like it's both a weapon and a burden. There's a lived-in quality to every movement, whether he's walking into a tense negotiation or sprinting into chaos, that makes the character feel less like a superhero on a poster and more like a soldier with a conscience. His performance thrives in the quieter beats, where a pause before speaking says more than the dialogue, and a look across a crowded room reads like a decision being made in real time. In action, he's all precision and grit, but it's the conviction in his eyes that sells why the shield still matters. The antagonist plays their part with an unsettling calm, never overplaying menace but letting intent simmer in every line. They deliver arguments like they're doing you a favor, and that composure makes the moments they snap feel dangerous. What's impressive is how they blur the line between villain and visionary. You find yourself understanding their point even as you root against their methods. Their best scenes aren't when they're throwing punches but when they're throwing ideas, forcing the hero to fight on ideological ground. It's the kind of performance that sticks in your head long after the scene changes. The mentor figure arrives with the authority of someone who's seen enough battles to know what victory actually costs. They don't waste words, and that restraint turns every line into a statement worth weighing. There's no forced sentimentality here. The warmth is earned, arriving only after the hero proves they can stand without leaning. This actor plays the role like a chess master, each glance or shift in tone a calculated move, shaping the hero's journey without ever feeling like they're steering the wheel. The field partner brings a kinetic spark to the screen, the kind of energy that makes every scene feel like it could tip into chaos. Early on, the enthusiasm edges into recklessness, but the actor lets that impatience gradually sharpen into focus. Their chemistry with the lead feels unforced, building from wary coordination to genuine trust. You can see the growth in the way they move together in combat. Early fights are overlapping swings, later fights are split-second handoffs. That evolution is sold entirely through performance, no speeches required. The institutional power player is a masterclass in layered restraint. On the surface, it's bureaucracy in a suit, but the actor slips in flashes of belief, fear, and calculation that keep the character from feeling like a stock obstacle. Their confrontations with the hero are some of the most riveting in the film, because both are right in their own frame of reference. It's a role that could have been forgettable, but here it becomes a vital thread, holding the political stakes in place while the physical stakes explode around it. The rival ally bursts onto the screen with confidence dialed to 11. There's a swagger in every line delivery, the kind that dares the audience to keep up. Yet, when the story pushes them into moments of doubt or sacrifice, the performance doesn't shy away from vulnerability. That shift from arrogance to respect is subtle but effective, and when they finally fall into step with a hero, it's satisfying because the groundwork was laid in every earlier clash. Even the smallest roles get attention from the cast. A civilian witness doesn't just fill the frame, they anchor the stakes, reacting in ways that remind you what's on the line beyond the explosions. A tech expert in the background earns their payoff by layering frustration, humor, and determination into their limited screen time. These performances keep the world feeling lived in, making sure the story doesn't float away into pure spectacle. What makes the ensemble click is how each actor understands their character's place in the larger conversation of the film. No one plays it like they're just there to support the lead. They all seem to be fighting their own battles, with their own convictions, and those currents run under every interaction. The result is a set of performances that don't just deliver the story, they embody it, making every decision, every argument, and every alliance feel like it could only happen between these exact people in this exact moment. The director sets the tone in the first minute and never loses the thread. Grounded boots-on concrete realism welded to big idea spectacle. You can feel it in the way the camera moves. When things are stable, frames are calm and centered, a quiet confidence. When the world tilts, the lens gets closer, breathier, letting footsteps and fabric rustle push into the soundscape. That push-pull creates a mood where even a conversation in a hallway hums like a fuse, and when the action finally detonates, it feels earned rather than scheduled. Shot composition is purposeful, almost argumentative. The shield is rarely tossed into the center just to look cool. It's angled, reflected, framed behind glass or signage so the symbol is always in dialogue with its environment. Over-the-shoulder setups stack competing flags, badges, and screens inside the same image, turning simple coverage into commentary. Wide frames are used like paragraphs, spaced to establish context and consequence, while close-ups function like underlines, deployed only when a choice is being made. The director likes to hold a beat a hair past comfort, letting a look land before cutting, and that patience gives the actors room to speak without speaking. Pacing is designed like interval training. The film sprints when it must, but it protects pockets of quiet where characters recalibrate. After a set piece, the rhythm drops to street-level tempo. A door creaks, a kettle hisses, a news ticker crawls. Those breathers aren't filler, they're the hinge that lets the next escalation feel sharper. Within action, the edit trusts geography. The director stages with layered planes, foreground threat, midground objective, background chaos, so your eyes know where to go, and cross-cutting is timed to decision points rather than arbitrary countdowns. The result is kinetic without becoming visual white noise. Stylistic choices sneak in as signatures. Match cuts turn propaganda posters into live protests, a press conference flash into a riot shield, a circular dolly around the hero echoing the arc of the shield mid-flight. The sound design collaborates with the camera. Concrete swallows footsteps, glass rooms turn speech brittle, open streets widen the acoustics so a siren becomes part of the score. The music threads a martial backbone with modern textures, but the director saves full swell for moral pivots, not just explosions. When the theme finally stands tall, it's because the character has decided what it means, not because the scene needed louder drums. The director has a keen sense for how power looks in a room. Blocking isn't random. Authority sits, doubt stands, conviction advances. Briefings are built like mini-thrillers, with screens casting data over faces and reflections doubling characters to hint at divided loyalties. When the story shifts to the field, the lens choice changes too. Slightly wider glass in tight spaces to heighten claustrophobia, longer lenses outdoors to flatten distance and emphasize how close danger really is. You feel the difference between fighting to enter a space and fighting to escape one. Action favors credibility over invincibility. Practical stunts lead, digital work finishes, and the seams are hard to spot because the director treats VFX like lighting, there to serve the moment, not steal it. Impacts have weight. You see knees buckle, you hear harness strain, you register the cost. The camera doesn't swoop just to swoop, it moves with intent, tracking the objective rather than chasing the coolest angle. That discipline means when the director finally breaks form, a whip pan across an impossible throw, a vertiginous drop off a skyline, the flourish reads as punctuation, not posture. The political spine of the story is handled with visual wit. Public scenes bristle with cameras within the camera, little boxes framing the hero in real time, making the audience complicit in the on-screen scrutiny. In private, the director dims the palette and simplifies the lines, stripping the frame of noise so stakes land clean. A recurring motif of glass, shattered, fogged, mirrored, maps trust and transparency without calling attention to itself. When a key conversation happens on a porch with nothing but evening air and creaking wood, it lands harder because the film has taught you how loud silence can be. Transitions are storytelling devices, not just scene changes. An L-cut keeps a line of doubt echoing over triumphant images, undercutting easy victory. A door slam bridges to a gavel strike, a flicked light switch becomes the flare of a detonator. The director seems allergic to default coverage, always hunting for the angle that tells you what the moment is about, not just what it looks like. Even crowds are directed with intention, shifting from awe to anxiety to anger across the runtime so the public feels like a character with an evolving point of view. The emotional temperature is managed like a dimmer, not a switch. The director knows when to let faces carry the day and when to pull back and let the city breathe. There's a standout sequence where the hero chooses process over expedience. The camera steps back as if giving space for that decision to live, then returns with a measured push-in as consequences arrive. It's not flashy, but it's confident, and confidence is a style all its own. Most impressive is the narrative vision connecting all of these choices. The movie argues through images that symbols are only as honest as the hands that wield them. So the director keeps putting those hands in the frame, gripping a railing, steadying a civilian, hesitating over a switch, reminding you that heroism is tactile, not theoretical. By the time the final set piece intercuts a city-scale crisis with a single human appeal, the grammar of the film has prepared you to read both tracks as equally important. The spectacle dazzles, but the shot that sticks is a simple two-shot where agreement costs both people something, and the director holds it just long enough for you to feel the price. The cinematography works like a second narrator, always adding subtext to the scene. The choice of angles feels deliberate, almost strategic. Low angles when the hero stands firm, framing him against open sky to suggest possibility, and high, almost surveillance-like shots when the story wants you to question whether he's in control. Close-ups aren't just for reaction, they're used to catch the flicker before a decision, the half-breath before a leap, the weight settling in someone's shoulders. The lens doesn't just record action, it measures consequence. Lighting plays a huge role in shifting tone without a single line of dialogue. Daylight scenes in public spaces carry a crisp, almost documentary sharpness, making every detail visible as if the audience is part of the crowd watching events unfold in real time. Private moments slip into warmer, more directional light, carving faces out of shadow so you feel the intimacy or the tension. In darker sequences, the lighting doesn't go flat, it fractures into sharp highlights, street lamps slicing through rain, emergency lights strobing across tense faces, turning the environment into part of the storytelling. When a critical choice is made, light often shifts subtly, signaling the emotional temperature of the moment. Framing is where the film's visual personality really shines. Wide shots aren't just to show scale, they often layer foreground, midground, and background with competing actions, letting your eye wander and discover story beats without being spoon-fed. Over-the-shoulder frames often place the shield in the corner of the image, reminding you that it's more than a prop, it's a constant presence in the conversation. The camera sometimes drifts during dialogue, letting background elements slide into focus, almost as if the world itself is listening in or reacting. This keeps even static scenes charged with potential. There are moments that burn into memory purely because of how they're shot. A low, tracking dolly following boots through water during a covert approach makes you feel the stealth before you even hear it. A 360-degree slow pan during a tense standoff pulls you into the uncertainty, giving equal weight to every player in the scene. A match cut from the curve of the shield to the arc of a rising sun reframes the symbol not just as a tool, but as a horizon to aim for. And in one of the most striking beats, a chaotic battle pauses for a single wide shot where smoke and sunlight split the frame down the middle, the hero standing right on the divide, visually caught between two futures. Atmosphere is built as much from what's shown as what's withheld. In chase sequences, the camera stays just a step too close, making you feel the claustrophobia of pursuit. In moments of public scrutiny, it pulls back into the crowd, framing the hero as just one figure among many, forcing you to see him through other eyes. During quieter, reflective moments, the lens lingers just long enough for ambient sound to take over. Wind in trees, a far-off siren, a flag snapping in the breeze, creating space for the weight of the moment to land. The use of movement is restrained but powerful. When the camera goes handheld, it's not to mimic chaos but to create intimacy, like you've stepped into the scene uninvited. When it locks into a smooth glide, it's signaling control or inevitability. During action, the cinematography respects spatial clarity. Tracking shots and long takes let you follow the logic of a fight rather than just react to cuts. This makes the victories feel earned because you've seen every beat play out without losing orientation. Every choice, angle, light, frame, feels in service to the story's central theme. The shield, the symbol, and the human holding it are constantly in dialogue with the world around them. The cinematography doesn't just capture that conversation, it participates in it, nudging the audience toward questions the script doesn't always ask out loud. And in doing so, it turns the visual language of the film into a constant reminder that every hero shot comes with a shadow, and every shadow hints at the cost of standing in the light. Editing here acts like a hidden conductor, setting the film's heartbeat and deciding when to sprint and when to let you catch it. It's not just about cutting frames but about sculpting tension and tenderness so both land with surgical precision. The film alternates between pulse-quickening bursts and long, necessary exhales. Action sequences favor clean, geography-respecting cuts and occasional long tracking takes so you always know who's where and why a punch matters, while quieter moments are allowed to breathe, lingering close-ups, held reactions, and reverberant ambient sound that let choices land emotionally rather than just narratively. Cross-cutting is used like a pressure gauge. The editor slices between a city-scale threat and an intimate conversation until the two tracks feel like a single, inevitable machine, which makes the climax feel urgent because you've been psychically building toward the same second from multiple angles. Transitional tools, L-cuts and J-cuts, are everywhere, letting dialogue or sound lead into the next scene and creating the sense that consequences travel beyond a single frame. Match cuts and visual motifs stitch scenes together thematically, a hand closing a door cut to a fist clenching on a shield, for example. So editing becomes commentary, not just continuity. The middle pacing takes risks. A few expository sections run a touch long as the story threads are sorted, and those stretches ask patience, but the editor smartly counterbalances by chopping subsequent beats shorter, turning urgency into an engine that pulls the lull into motion rather than leaving it as dead weight. Rhythm is deliberately varied. Montage compresses time for planning or aftermath, jump cuts or tighter edits convey disorientation during betrayals, and measured long takes are saved for moral pivots so we feel the weight of a decision in real time. Sound plays a partner role in the cut. A cut that lands on silence amplifies the isolation of a character's choice. A cut that lands on overlapping crowd noise emphasizes public pressure. Action editing resists the modern temptation to become visual noise. Instead, it emphasizes spatial logic. Who moves, who covers, who has the angle. So hits feel consequential, not just flashy. The editor also uses information economy as a tool. Withholding a detail for one cut and revealing it in the next reframes what you just saw, turning what could be a simple sequence into a mini-mystery that rewires your expectations. Pacing impacts emotion directly. Faster edits ratchet anxiety and amplify helplessness. Slower cuts let regret and resolve anchor a scene, so when the film wants you to root for the hero it gives you access to small, human beats, and when it wants your pulse raised it tightens the montage and accelerates cut frequency. In short, the editing acts like a silent strategist, clarifying action, deepening doubt, and timing revelations so the audience is never merely watching events unfold but is being nudged, breath by breath, toward the stakes the story wants you to care about. The score and soundtrack act less like background wallpaper and more like a running commentary that hustles the story forward, raises an eyebrow at a false victory, and slips a hand into the scene when the camera can't. The film opens with a taut, percussion-driven cue that feels like boot steps and breath fused into rhythm, immediately setting stakes and tempo. The hero gets a compact motif. Not a triumphant anthem at first but a compact, interval-driven idea that evolves from brass-backed assertion in public scenes to a stripped-down piano or solo string during moments of doubt, so the theme itself grows up with the character rather than announcing him like a billboard. The antagonist's music is cunningly different, low-register textures, jittery electronics, and fractured choir tones that make every speech feel like an invitation you're not sure you should accept, and when those motifs appear under seemingly ordinary scenes they retroactively make you suspicious of what just happened. Institutional or bureaucratic moments get a colder sonic palette, muted brass, a marching snare in an odd meter, so policy scenes have their own heartbeat that often clashes with the hero's human rhythm. That clash becomes musical shorthand for the ethical friction on screen. The soundtrack, licensed tracks and source music, is used smartly as public mood setting. A catchy pop song playing in a rally becomes a biting counterpoint when the lyrics start to sound like propaganda, and diegetic audio like news tickers and TV soundbites is blended into the score at times so media scrutiny literally bleeds into the music and vice versa. There are standout cues that demand attention. A mid-film elegy that pairs everything to a single piano phrase over distant synth washes, making a small decision feel monumental. A chase cue that stitches tribal percussion to string ostinatos so the editing's quick cuts still have a spine. And a finale suite where the hero's motif and the antagonist's texture are braided so the resolution reads as musical negotiation rather than simple triumph. Silence is treated as an instrument. On a few of the heaviest moral beats the soundtrack drops out completely, and the absence of music makes footsteps, breathing, and ambient city noise unbearably loud, forcing the audience into the same moral quiet the characters must face. The mix respects dialogue. The score swells to support emotional pivots but never cheapens them by drowning speech, and in action it leans into low-end rhythm and percussive hits that accent actual impacts rather than cover over them. that restraint keeps the score from feeling like a megaphone and instead makes it a confidant. Recurring motifs act like narrative post-it notes. A short 2- or 3-note figure linked to the shield will sneak into unrelated scenes to remind you the symbol's weight hasn't left the plot, and the editor uses those motifs as glue for match cuts and thematic transitions so music and picture move as one. Overall, the soundtrack works like a conversational partner to the visuals, sometimes arguing, sometimes consoling, sometimes goading, and its smartest trick is how it lets themes breathe and mutate rather than repeating the same emotional cue until it goes hollow. The movie loves to lean on ideas that feel big enough to argue about at a dinner table: power, trust, and what a symbol actually buys you, but it doesn't hand those ideas to you like a lecture. It stages them as arguments you watch people live through. The shield is the obvious shorthand. It's not just metal, it's a contract between a person and the public, and the film keeps returning to the question of who gets to sign that contract and on what terms. That opens up a cluster of related themes: authority versus accountability, who is allowed to act and who gets held responsible when things go wrong, the tension between security and liberty, do measures that promise safety quietly erode choice, and the messy politics of representation, a symbol that once unified can fracture when different groups read different promises into it. Public perception and media become active characters in the moral arithmetic. The film shows how headlines compress complexity into sound bites, how optics can become policy, and how a camera angle can decide who looks guilty before a judge does. Alongside the big institutional questions, there are humane, granular themes that keep the argument anchored. The cost of heroism on real lives, the quiet labor of those who clean up after violence, and the memory of small communities who remember past, necessary operations as trauma, not triumph. The antagonist's philosophy complicates the moral map by making some of their logic eerily persuasive. Safety without choice sounds tidy until you meet the people whose choices vanish, and that is the film's clever move. It doesn't let you write the villain off as cartoonish, it forces the audience to sit with the seduction of order. Identity and legacy thread through the narrative as well. Heirs to a symbol wrestle with whether to mimic precedent or reinterpret it for a changed world, and that generational handoff raises questions about whether traditions should be preserved, reformed, or intentionally retired. Coalition and trust are treated as actionable strategies rather than platitudes. The story argues that durable solutions require building unlikely alliances and that moral clarity sometimes depends on pragmatic compromise, which makes the film suspicious of lone wolf saviors and sympathetic to messy teamwork. There's also an undercurrent about surveillance and transparency. Glass, screens, and live broadcasts are not just visuals but metaphors for a public that simultaneously demands openness and performs outrage the moment anything slips. The movie toys with the idea of spectacle as both weapon and thermometer. Public drama can force accountability, but it can also be weaponized to manufacture consent. Finally, the film is quietly preoccupied with repair. Not the cinematic fix everything with one final battle repair, but the slower business of rebuilding trust, acknowledging debt, and accepting that wins come with receipts. Rather than closing its argument, the film layers questions about who wields force, who watches, and who forgives, leaving you less inclined to walk out with a tidy answer and more likely to carry a handful of provocative, sometimes uncomfortable ideas that keep the conversation going long after the credits. The visual effects in this film don't just sit politely in the background, they practically strut into the room, confident enough to make you forget you're looking at something created inside a computer. There's a seamlessness to how the digital and practical elements shake hands. You'll be hard-pressed to pinpoint where the green screen ends and the on-set craftsmanship begins. Explosions have texture, debris moves with weight, and the light bouncing off characters feels like it's coming from the same sun in the same sky they're standing under. The environments, whether sprawling cityscapes or intimate, lived-in rooms, are stitched together so well that the transition from physical set to digital extension is invisible unless you're actively hunting for it. The action sequences are where the effects department flexes the hardest. When buildings crumble, dust clouds behave like actual dust, wrapping around the frame and slightly obscuring the chaos in a way that makes it feel captured, not manufactured. Digital doubles, which often betray themselves in uncanny ways in other films, here move with a weight and physics that keep them grounded. You never get that hollow, floaty sensation that screams CGI. The practical effects act as the glue, real props shattering, stunt work timed to perfection, water splashing with a randomness only reality can provide, and the VFX crew smartly builds on top of them instead of replacing them wholesale. Even smaller, quieter moments benefit. A subtle flicker in holographic projections, reflections that obey the laws of optics, and atmospheric elements like smoke or rain that interact believably with actors. The color grading ties the whole visual language together, making sure the CGI doesn't look overly polished compared to the grit of the real-world shots. The best trick the film pulls is using VFX not as a highlight reel but as an integrated part of storytelling. Sometimes the most impressive effect is one you don't notice until you realize a location, a stunt, or even a background crowd didn't exist outside of a render farm. This commitment to invisible artistry keeps the immersion unbroken, letting the audience live in the world instead of watching it from behind a pane of digital glass. The set design in this film isn't just decoration, it's storytelling in physical form. Every surface, every object, every shadow feels deliberate, as if the spaces themselves are characters with histories and secrets to share. You can almost smell the dust in the corners of an abandoned warehouse, feel the cold stone underfoot in ancient ruins, or hear the faint hum of neon lights in a rain-slick back alley. The props aren't generic placeholders, they carry weight and personality, sometimes revealing more about the characters than dialogue ever could. A battered coffee mug, a scuffed pair of boots by the door, or a cluttered workbench tells you who lives there and what they've been through. The locations themselves work as narrative amplifiers. A sunlit meadow isn't just a pretty backdrop, it breathes optimism into the scene. A cramped, dimly lit apartment doesn't just set mood, it reinforces tension and claustrophobia. The design team understands how to guide your eyes, placing visual cues that draw attention to important details without shouting for it. There's also a clever interplay between real-world locations and built sets. Some places feel almost too perfect to exist, yet they do, while others are meticulously crafted constructions that fool you into believing they've stood for decades. The transitions between locations are so fluid that you're carried effortlessly from one environment to the next, each new space expanding the scope of the story's world. Even fleeting shots, like a market bustling with life or a quiet park bench under a flickering street lamp, carry enough texture to feel lived in. This is production design that doesn't settle for looking authentic. It goes further, making the audience feel like they could step through the screen and start exploring. The dialogue in this film doesn't just move the plot along, it dances, provokes, and lingers in your mind long after the scene fades. Every exchange feels intentional, whether it's a quick jab of sarcasm that lands like a perfectly timed punchline or a slow, deliberate confession that draws the air out of the room. Characters don't speak like actors reciting lines, they speak like people with histories, grudges, inside jokes, and unspoken fears. There's a rhythm to the conversations, sometimes playful and rapid-fire, other times heavy with pauses that say more than words ever could. The script weaves in layers of meaning without making it obvious, letting certain lines hit you in the moment while others quietly wait in the back of your mind until they suddenly make sense later. It's not afraid to mix tones either. One minute you're laughing at a razor-sharp comeback, the next you're caught off guard by a line so raw it could break your heart. The beauty is in the subtlety. Even throwaway remarks can reveal character traits, foreshadow events, or shift the emotional undercurrent of a scene. Some lines are destined to be quoted, the kind of dialogue that becomes part of cultural conversation, while others work like invisible threads, stitching the film's emotional tapestry together without calling attention to themselves. This is writing that knows when to speak loudly and when to whisper, trusting the audience to catch the nuance and savor it. This film doesn't just sit comfortably in its genre, it plays with it like a cat toying with yarn, knowing exactly when to follow the rules and when to toss them aside for something unexpected. It understands the beats audiences expect, delivering those moments with precision, but then throws in curveballs that keep you guessing. If it's action, it doesn't just give you fights, it gives you choreography that feels like a dance with stakes, where every punch or movement has personality. If it's suspense, it knows when to stretch the tension so thin you can hear your own heartbeat, and then snap it with a twist that feels earned, not cheap. Humor, when it appears, isn't just filler, it's woven into the DNA of the story, breaking tension at just the right moment or adding an extra layer to the characters. Drama, meanwhile, is never overplayed, it comes in waves that feel organic, not forced. The film takes familiar genre elements, those tropes you think you've seen 100 times, and gives them a fresh coat of paint, sometimes by flipping them upside down, other times by leaning into them so hard they feel brand new. It respects the genre's roots while proving it's not afraid to evolve, creating an experience that feels both comfortingly familiar and thrillingly unpredictable. The film doesn't shy away from holding a mirror up to the world we live in, but it does so with the subtlety of a sly storyteller rather than the blunt force of a lecture. Its social and cultural commentary isn't dropped in like a side note, it's baked into the DNA of the plot, characters, and even the visual choices. You feel it in the way certain scenes linger on societal divides, in the way a throwaway line of dialogue suddenly echoes a real-world debate, or in how a background detail quietly hints at larger cultural shifts. It navigates sensitive topics with a confidence that suggests the filmmakers know exactly what they want to say, but they trust the audience enough to read between the lines. Political undertones emerge not through grand speeches, but through the consequences of the characters' actions and the systems they're trapped in. Contemporary issues slip into the narrative like a whispered secret. You catch them if you're paying attention, and if you are, they land with a sting. It never feels forced because the commentary is woven seamlessly into the world building. The social realities exist as naturally as the characters themselves. And when the film touches on complex or controversial subjects, it does so with nuance, showing multiple perspectives without diluting the emotional impact. It's the kind of storytelling that makes you leave the theater thinking about the bigger picture, even if you didn't realize you've been thinking about it the whole time. This is the kind of film that doesn't just play out on the screen. It reaches out, grabs you by the collar, and pulls you right into its world. Every emotional beat feels deliberate, whether it's ringing out a laugh so sudden you almost miss the next line, or dropping a gut-punch moment that leaves the theater silent except for the sound of someone shifting in their seat. The pacing of emotional highs and lows keeps you hooked, never letting you get too comfortable. One scene might have you leaning forward, heart pounding, while the next slips in a moment so tender it catches you off guard. It's the type of storytelling that sparks post-movie conversations, the kind where people stand outside the theater debating favorite scenes, hidden meanings, and what they think will happen next. The film doesn't just aim for a reaction, it aims for connection, making you feel like you've experienced something alongside the characters. And for some, it's the kind of story that demands a second or even third viewing, not because you missed anything, but because you want to relive the rush, the emotion, and the tiny details that make it all so satisfying. Think of this movie as a bridge between blockbuster muscle and political thriller brain. It wears the franchise badge but often borrows the playbook of smarter, grittier entries that use spectacle to ask hard questions rather than drown them. Tonally, it nods to the kind of Captain America stories fans remember for their moral tension. Public optics and institutional pressure feel like central opponents, not just background noise, which puts it in the same conversation as the franchise's more politically minded outings while still carving its own lane by making the shields meaning the actual plot engine rather than just a prop. Where some franchise films tilt toward non-stop spectacle, this one calibrates spectacle to argument. Big set pieces exist to test ideas, not just to reset the scoreboard, so action scenes often feel more purposeful and geographically coherent than the modern trend of cut-and-gloss set pieces. Compared with other recent tentpoles that prioritized scale over intimacy, this film doubles down on smaller human beats and coalition building. Think more coalition drama and less solo savior fantasy. So relationships and compromises matter as much as the effects budget. The antagonist also reads less like a cardboard villain and more like a movement builder, which echoes political thriller traditions and gives the film a rare itchiness. You can trace the logic and still disagree, instead of merely booing the plot device. Visually and technically it feels like the director has learned from flashy predecessors but chosen restraint where it counts. Practical stunt work, clear spatial editing, and effects that support narrative clarity make it feel tactile in a way a lot of glossy franchises don't bother with. If you map it against the director's own past films, there's a clear arc from stylistic confidence to purposeful restraint. Previous works' bravura moments are still present but now serve argument and character rather than self-display. As a genre piece it plays with expectations, delivering crowd-pleasing beats while quietly nudging the audience toward debate, so it's familiar enough to satisfy fans hungry for heroics but fresh enough to invite conversation the next day. In short, it sits beside the franchise greats without copying them, borrowing the best parts of political thrillers and crowd-pleasing action alike, and staking a claim as the kind of blockbuster that wants you arguing on your way home rather than just humming the theme. This is a film that doesn't just tell a story, it hides stories within the story, waiting for you to catch them. Every recurring object, color choice, and framing decision feels intentional, like the director left breadcrumbs for an audience willing to look closer. That worn-down locket the camera keeps lingering on isn't just a prop, it's a silent history book, a reminder of loss and loyalty that drives the character's every move without a single line of dialogue. Shadows fall across faces at key moments not just for mood, but to show the weight of moral compromise. Characters literally step in and out of light as their loyalties shift. Even the weather becomes a kind of emotional translator. Clear skies when truths surface, heavy rain when motives blur, as if nature itself is siding with the plot. Colors operate like secret dialogue too, a certain shade of red that only appears in moments of betrayal, or muted tones during scenes where hope is fading. Sometimes the symbolism is grand and unmissable, like a crumbling statue in the background quietly mirroring the fall of an ideal. Other times it's so subtle you'd only spot it on a rewatch, a character's reflection distorting in a broken mirror just before they make a choice they can't take back. These visual metaphors don't scream for attention. they whisper, layering meaning into scenes that might seem straightforward at first glance. It's the kind of craftsmanship that rewards observant viewers, turning a second or third viewing into a treasure hunt for thematic clues. By the end, you realize the movie wasn't just telling you what was happening, it was showing you why it mattered, in a language of symbols woven deep into its visual DNA. If you drop this film into the middle of a long-running series, it reads less like a standalone spectacle and more like a deliberate pivot in a continuing argument about what a symbol actually does in a living world. It takes the shield out of the mythology museum and puts it back into messy modern politics, so instead of just answering, "Can he win?" the franchise now asks, who gets to decide what winning looks like? That reframing matters because it reshapes the narrative gravity of future entries. Characters who once orbit the hero now carry political weight, institutions that used to be scenery become active players, and plot threads about legitimacy, accountability, and media scrutiny are no longer background texture but the engine driving subsequent conflicts. In practice, that means familiar beats are honored, you'll get the blockbuster set pieces fans expect, but they're repurposed as tests of ideology rather than mere scoreboard moments, so the film both rewards long-time viewers with callbacks and changes the stakes in ways that ripple outward. Allies earn new roles, grudges get new potency, and villains who look like one-off threats get ideological lifelines that concede spin-offs or serialized TV arcs. Technically and tonally it sends signals too. If the film leans harder into political thriller language, tight edits, interrogation-style scenes, public hearings, expect the franchise to lean that way for a while. If it doubles down on coalition drama, future stories will likely foreground alliances and compromises rather than lone hero saves. The movie also performs a kind of continuity housekeeping. It recontextualizes past events so that choices made in earlier entries read differently now, and that retroactive shading gives veteran viewers the satisfying click of pieces rearranging without cheap retconning. For the franchise economy, this is smart. It creates narrative obligations, new debts, public reckonings, legal questions, that provide fuel for sequels, prequels, or side stories, and it elevates supporting characters into narrative currency whose arcs the studio can spend later. If you flip the prompt and treat the film as historical fiction rather than franchise entry, the measure changes. Accuracy becomes a matter of texture and consequence. Costume, dialect, period design, and the ethical framing of real events all get judged for whether they honor lived experience or merely borrow atmosphere. In that mode, the film's success hinges on whether it lets audiences feel the past as a lived, tactile truth rather than a cinematic backdrop. Small, accurate details, how a newspaper looked, the cadence of public announcements, the practical limits of communications, do more to sell immersion than a parade of obvious epic markers. Either way, the movie's most interesting contribution is that it refuses to be inert connective tissue. It actively recasts the symbol and the political landscape around it, turning what could have been a simple chapter into a hinge that opens new directions for characters, institutions, and the moral puzzles the larger saga will now have to answer. Money talk time. This movie was built like a tentpole, with a production budget around $180 million, and you can see that kind of cash on screen in the production design, stunts, and effects that don't skimp on scale. The theatrical receipts tell the next part of the story. Worldwide, the film sits in the low to mid $400 million range, roughly $415 million, with about $200.5 million coming from the domestic market. Numbers that make it a solid global performer but not a runaway billion-dollar smash. The opening weekend was muscular, and $88-89 million launch that signaled strong front-loaded interest, but the movie's legs softened faster than some earlier franchise entries, which pushed more weight onto ancillary revenue to finish the accounting. Now the accounting quirk everyone loves to argue about. Studios don't just compare box office to production budget. They also have prints and advertising, distribution splits, and back-end deals to think about, and a common industry heuristic is that a film needs roughly 2 to 2.5 times its production budget at the worldwide box office to move into clear theatrical profit territory once marketing and exhibitor shares are accounted for. Put bluntly, that math tends to put the theatrical break-even line noticeably above the headline production number. Layer that rule onto this title and you get a nuanced picture. $415 million versus a $180 million production spend looks respectable. It's well above the budget, but it likely falls short of the tidy theatrical home run threshold once global revenue splits and a sizable P and a campaign are included. The film's mixed to middling audience and critical buzz, with a cinema score in the B range, also helps explain why the box office leaned heavily on that big opening weekend instead of enjoying marathon, word-of-mouth-driven growth. Marketing choices and timing matter here. Tentpoles typically carry major P and a line items, often tens of millions, sometimes much more depending on the campaign and global push. and when the word of mouth is uneven, the studio leans harder on paid reach and international windows to claw toward profitability. Practically speaking, that means the film's final profit story is likely to be written across multiple ledgers. Theatrical receipts bought solid ground, but streaming licensing, TV windows, home entertainment, and long-tail merchandising are the pieces that will determine whether the studio ends this chapter with a modest win, a wash, or a headline about underperformance relative to expectations. Meanwhile, from a production quality angle, the money looks well spent on screen. The craft elements generally match the budgetary ambition, so even if the theatrical math isn't a clean win, the film still delivered the kind of technical polish and spectacle studios pay big budgets to secure. If you want the full, unfiltered blast of this movie's scale, nothing beats a proper theater experience. Big screen, booming surround sound, that communal gasp when a jaw-dropping moment hits. This is the kind of film that was clearly built to flex in a cinema. The wide shots, the layered sound design, the sheer volume of visual detail all feel amplified when you're in a dark room with a screen that fills your field of vision. Theatrical projection also preserves the sharpness and depth of the cinematography in a way most home setups can't quite replicate. That said, if you've missed the theatrical window or simply prefer the comfort of your own couch, the film is now available on multiple digital platforms for rental or purchase, allowing you to watch in crisp high definition and pause for your own snack breaks. The streaming debut brought it to a much wider audience, complete with the convenience of instant replay for those blink and you miss it moments. Of course, your setup will dictate your experience. A modest TV will get the job done, but a large 4K screen with a decent soundbar or surround system gets you closest to the cinema magic. There's also the IMAX versus standard debate. If it's still playing in IMAX near you, those sequences were clearly composed with that expanded aspect ratio in mind, giving certain scenes an almost vertigo-inducing scope. On the other hand, watching at home lets you control the environment, adjust brightness, and skip trailers, which can be a perk for repeat viewings. In short, the movie plays big no matter where you watch it, but if your goal is to wring every ounce of spectacle from the filmmaking, a theater with premium projection is the crown jewel experience, with home viewing as the comfortable, and increasingly accessible, second act.